feel confident that I'll have to say changing dates again or something like that.
Do you recall the name of the company here?
It is National COVID-19 Testing, and they're working with Achieve Health Management. So they're everybody I've talked to though, from Santa Rosa all the way up to here, they're all having the same issue. That they've all signed on with these companies who promised them the world, and unfortunately don't have the personnel to recruit. So
we've received multiple different emails from a variety of different people through our connections with CSBA largely that offer these services. I haven't been forwarding them on to you because we've been talking about having somebody else already set up to do this.
Right. They're all in the same boat. They all use exactly the same model.
Yes.
And so I don't think it matters which one you're looking at. They all pay about the same, that kind of thing. So it's just a matter of we don't have personnel to do it. So, let's see. I'm meeting tomorrow with Don Alameda to discuss the Brookside West Wing project and some possible grant funding for the TK full day TK program expansion grant that they have through the state. That if that works out, then those matching funds could be as much as 75%. The state provides and we provide 25%. If we fall into the second tier, it would be a 50-50 match, but that's still doubling every dollar that we're spending on the project. So we're going to take a look at that. Terry, Don, and I will go for a walk over Brookside and just take a look and put a visual on it and put some fine tuning on the plans before he's looking at coming out with 3 different plans. One that's looking at used portables, which would not be able to access any of this funding. So we don't get funded for this. That's the plan we would have to go with. Looking at modular structures and then looking at stick-built structures. And if either of the latter two, we would need some state funding to support that. But if we were to get the state funding, it would be really nice to put in some nicer buildings and perhaps be able to do a little grading over there where we could actually level it down. Because I don't know how familiar you are with that step up, but it's pretty steep for little guys going up from the playground up to those classrooms and everything.
So that modular and conventional construction fall under the same umbrella. It's the portables that don't.
Correct.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. Anything that can roll down the highway as a whole structure is basically how they defined it. So I'm starting next week a new teacher support group. We meet once a month on Thursdays, on the 4th or 3rd Thursday of the month. And we'll continue that monthly throughout the year so that we can just touch base. We'll talk about some different topics, but mostly just make sure that how they're feeling supported and making sure they have access to the resources they need to be successful. Because we do have a lot of teachers who are new or new to the profession. And we want to make sure that they're successful and that they're serving our students well.
Can you put out that schedule? Are we able to attend that via Zoom?
Yes. I'll send that out. I'm sending out an invitation tomorrow, so I'll just include y'all. So, I have scheduled an Sr3 Parent Meeting, and this is required for our Sr3 plan for October 4th from 5 to 6:30 p.m. Our sites are also, as a part of their site council, bringing up the ESSER expenditures to get the feedback from their site council as well. So we should have met the community involvement piece of that's required. I'll be bringing that plan to you back in our meeting in October. It's due at the end of October to be submitted to the state. That's one of several plans that we'll have to do this year, and they keep moving deadlines on us. So fortunately, they keep moving them later, so it's okay. But we've got an Lcap update that'll have to happen, not the one that we're approving tonight, but for the 15% increase that they did for our concentration grant. So that'll be, is that one January? By January, I think, or just by the end of December. So we've got, and then we've got our A through G completer that has to be submitted by April, I think is what they're proposing to push the date back to at this point. So there'll be some weird plans this year. I guess it's just a heads up that I'm trying to give you. I know we've got a board calendar that has some of that stuff laid out. It doesn't have any of these plans on it. So we'll be in contact about why and when and all that fun stuff. The legislature is currently working on some trailer bill language. Some of the provisions that will be included at this point if it's passed, because they can't make any amendments at this point, are to allow substitutes to serve longer in a single classroom. And that will be for general education classrooms. So currently they can only serve 30 days. With this, for just this school year only, they would extend it out to 60 days in any classroom.
Before they become long-term subs?
No, currently as it sits, if you only have a 30-day sub permit, you can only serve 30 days in any one classroom in a given school year. This would extend that out to 60 days in any one classroom.
Is
So
that 60
typically, if
instructional
we get
days?
a long-term sub, we usually have to use somebody who has a like full multiple subject credential, or we typically can't use the folks who have the 30-day permit when we're billing those long-term.
Okay, so the 30-day permit doesn't require a BS or a BA?
No, it requires a bachelor's, yes, but it doesn't require any other, basically a bachelor's and you pass the CBS, and that's it. Versus the others, you would either have to be a long-term sub to get a provisional permit that we sometimes, but this that we have. There's some STIPs, and that's if you're on a statutory leave of some sort, that we can have a person with a bachelor's covering for that situation or whatnot. But for the most part, with just a 30-day sub credential, that's just your day-to-day sub that just comes in when you've got a sick teacher or you've got a teacher that needs to be out for a meeting or something.
Short-term loss instead
yeah.
of a long. Oh,
Right.
okay.
Yeah, so it's just about the credential that they hold at that point. So
Thanks.
other pieces that we think will be coming out of this is they're allowing some flexibility in getting an independent study contract signed. So if a student goes out on quarantine, that we won't have to, the day of, say, oh, and sign this independent study contract to please parents so that your child continues to be a part of school. We can do that up to 30 days after that first day of quarantine. So they'll give us a little bit more flexibility, and that just makes sense. So we can actually do a good job on the paperwork, which is highly audited. And seeing as how they've changed every single rule around independent study this year, it gives us some time to make sure that we're getting it right and that we're dotting our I's and crossing our T's. Because like I say, it will be audited heavily at the end of this year. I will save the rest of my COVID comments for our COVID item. That was the rest of my comments. So thank you.
I have just one question. You were talking about Brookside's West Wing or whatever we've been calling it. This means that it is not an option to tear it all apart and then have people rebuild it back up with the insulation and everything else.
When we looked at that, it was as expensive, if not more expensive, than pulling out what's there and putting in something new or something different.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And with the option of them pulling it out or them refurbishing on site,
Yeah.
you're still stuck with some frames and things like that, that there's some issues underneath there that probably need to be addressed with the grading and things that they do. There's some water that gets under there in the wintertime and things like
Yeah,
that. So,
little animals on the beach.
right. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, we are at our action discussion section, item A, public comments. I'll give you a brief reading. I found my glasses, so it's making that easier. Person wishing to be heard by the board shall first be recognized by the president and then shall proceed to comment as briefly as the subject permits. In general, individual speakers will be allowed 3 minutes to address the board on each agenda item or non-agenda item, and the board will limit the total time for public input on each item to 20 minutes. So, is there anyone in the Zoom arena that is interested in making public comment at this point?
Yes, I'm interested in the public comment.
Go ahead and identify yourself, please.
I'm Mills Matheson. I've been practicing medicine in Willits for 47 years. I have a special interest in COVID in the schools because I have a grandson in the Willits, two grandsons in the Willits schools, one a 9-year-old at Blosser, the other a senior at the high school. In addition, my wife is a retired teacher and a retired school board member. Joe is very aware of my interest. He gets almost daily emails from me with the latest articles, and he's responds quite quickly. Our society is in the midst of a great experiment. Can we keep schools open without making the COVID pandemic a lot worse? Since we're now dealing with the Delta variant, we have very little data, scientific data to guide us. Most of the data we have is based on the Alpha variant, which is very, very different, very weaker. So different school districts have different COVID mitigations. For example, most of California school districts are using a modified quarantine, but LA and San Francisco do not modify their quarantines. In LA, the whole class goes home for 2 weeks if just one student tests positive for COVID. I think now that the best thing that the school district can do is to closely monitor the schools for COVID transmission and quickly modify our mitigations if we run into a problem. In the future, we may need more testing. We may need a stricter quarantine. We may need to upgrade the quality of the masks the kids are wearing. But now I think we just need to closely monitor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Matheson. Anybody else interested in addressing the board? I see a hand up. That's Dr. Matheson. Once again, anybody else interested in addressing the board? Hearing none, we'll close public comment and move forward. We are at the consent agenda.
There are a couple of those items I'd like to discuss or at least question.
Okay, which ones are you talking about?
I'm talking about a correction to number 1. I have a couple of questions for number 4 and a couple of questions for number 5. Although I may have had, I'm not sure if I have questions about 4.
Okay,
Well, I
let's go ahead with your correction of the minutes for August 11th.
yeah, there was the comments in there that it was a list made by CSEA's maintenance department of all the things that had been accomplished by the maintenance department during the summer. And I was just concerned that it sounded as if maintenance had done roofing and all sorts of other things, which would have never allowed them even a half of the time that they needed to just do the things that they did do. And it's not that big of a deal, but it's kind of misleading. And I just wanted it clear that that was a list of things that were accomplished over the summer by outside and inside people. Well, outsourced, I guess is the proper word, and employed people by the district.
I appreciate that, but if you stop and think about it, maintenance did have a hand, at least in some measure of supervisory role in all of those things. In other words, there was maintenance touches all of those projects, even though they don't actually do the paving or do the roofing.
Oh, okay, and when it comes to the plumbing and the things like that, that they didn't have time for over the summer and doors and this and that, that's probably the consequence of having to supervise or being involved in those outsourced projects.
I would argue that some of those things are probably accurate.
That's close. Okay, thank you.
It's the best I can do for you,
I
Paul.
know. Thank you. That's close enough.
Alex, I might be able to help on that.
Go ahead, Dan.
So when we had the roofers here, we do daily morning walkthroughs with them to see if there's any problems they found, any problems we need to fix. Sometimes there was infrastructure, water lines, gas lines, power line conduits on roofs. Some of those got broken. We fixed them. We worked with them on some occasions to make sure they stayed out of the way of certain things that they didn't know were there. And then we work with them to give some suggestions on how to do some improvements to fix things to better off help us. So we didn't per se do all of the work, but we were involved with trying to make sure it got done for the best outcome for the district.
Thanks, Dan. You had a question on,
Yeah, I think I can ask my question for four after all. There was a person who was an employee for one day. What I'm curious about was that was it something the school could have helped with, or was it completely out of our hands, which is sort of what it sounds. I mean, if I only worked here for one day, it would probably be because something else came up I couldn't avoid. But that's not what I'm hearing. Sometimes I just want it. from
Sure.
you.
Because it would be pretty identifiable for the employee, that would be a conversation perhaps you and I could have offline.
And privately, okay,
Yes.
that's what I wasn't sure of, but I thought, well, I should say the name, okay. And then under the warrants, I just had a couple of questions about our district, it seems, paid Ukiah for someone who used to be personnel. Is there a
Are you talking about page 2 of the report? Of the warrant,
maybe,
of
yes,
the-
I am.
So we have, with our Title I funding, we are required to provide equitable services to private schools who have Willits students enrolled.
Uh-huh.
And the Waldorf School of Mendocino County does have some Willits students who are considered low income and Title I eligible. So we have an arrangement with Waldorf to provide those services, and the person who actually provided them is already employed by Ukiah and providing those same services, because they also have to provide equitable services under Title I. So instead of two different agencies paying the employee directly, Ukiah handled all of the payroll and we reimbursed Ukiah for our portion of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we do things, that particular program is similar to some special ed programs that we do when the district can't provide a particular service, right?
Correct, yes.
This is all the
Same
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 thing?
idea.
Oh, okay. I just wasn't certain about that. And then I didn't know what a tuition, I didn't know how we deal with administrative programs and paying their tuitions. It came out of Sacramento County. Is that they provided in service? That's at the bottom of the page. They provide in services, or are there
bottom of that-
programs people can apply to become administrators and part of their tuition will be covered? I didn't know if the district was offering grant type situations or,
What page are you
Okay.
on? What page is it?
oh, the bottom of 2 out of 2 or 2 out of 6 or whatever it says. See, it's a 7170 90. Oh, no, that's a check number, sorry. It is a 1-5800 program. I randomly checked these, and these were ones I didn't remember seeing before, so I was kind of surprised.
I'm
I
sorry,
mean, most of these are kind of the same thing over and over.
I'm not finding the one that you're talking about. The only thing I'm thinking of is that
It's
for.
the bottom of it, 3 out of 6, 3 of 6. It talks about a tuition fee admin program. It's about 4
Oh, yes, okay, so that I believe is induction support. So the same as we have
Oh,
to
okay.
provide for our teachers, we also have to provide for administrators who are working on their clear credentials.
Okay, so the district pays Sacramento to make programs available for,
It's the same as VISTA, only it's for administrators.
oh, okay,
Yeah.
I see. All righty. And then my last big one, it was a $14,000 bill. It went to the city of Willits, and I'm imagining for water for the month of July.
Yeah, we actually were just looking at the newest one and we're at 17,000.
Then I shouldn't be shocked at 14. Okay, well, I figured it was a water bill, but I thought we had problems and fixed them.
We watch that very closely month to month and always communicate with maintenance if we see any anomalies. And there also, I know you guys have worked on some strategies to try and reduce overall.
So we've got, we bought some new water tanks and installed them at Blosser.
Uh-huh.
And so now we actually have the ability to pump from our well there into those tanks that feeds our irrigation. And it doesn't kick back over until the tanks drop to a certain level. The well there is well able to keep up with that demand. And so that should cut our water consumption down a good bit there.
Oh,
Hopefully we'll start to see some of that come out in these bills in the next few months.
oh, I just,
We're trying strategies like that. Terry's really has a good mind for how to make that whole thing work, and his crew's great at
oh, good.
enacting that and getting it going. So
Uh-huh.
hopefully he's continuing to think that way, and hopefully we'll find some other opportunities where we can do similar
Oh,
types
good.
of things if the opportunity presents itself.
Oh, okay. I just thought we had an issue and then I thought it got fixed and went away, but I
Right?
guess not.
It's
A work in progress.
it's a work in progress, and
There
we're
you go.
working hard to address it on all our sites right now.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm assuming we're working to try and do our watering, not in the heat of the day,
Right. Yes.
early mornings, late evenings, kind of thing. Okay.
And to make sure that all of them are being, all the heads are being effective, you know, so they're looking at the different fields, getting everything up to speed. Was doing some grass seed out today as well, because it's a good time to start that type of thing.
So we do have the consent agenda. Paula, are you done?
I am, thank you.
Any other questions on the consent agenda?
I had some questions about things on the warrant register, but I made a list of them and I went by and talked to Joe the other day and he clarified what they were for and I don't have any more questions on the warrant register.
Good. Yeah. Basically, Joe or Nikki are both available either by phone or in person for questions on those particular issues. That's not to say you can't bring them up with a board meeting, but I would argue that it's probably better to take those up individually.
Yeah, I just figured no one else knew them either, but okay.
Like you, Paula, I pay close attention to it. And though I don't always make a question at the board meeting, when I have a question, I oftentimes talk to Nikki directly, or I'll talk to Joe. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll move to approve the consent agenda.
I'll second.
Seconded. Is there any discussion, any further discussion on the consent agenda? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye. Carries. We are at item C, discussion COVID response update.
All right. So as we talked a little bit before, we're working with that outside provider. Hopefully we can get that testing started. Like I say, I should hear tomorrow, so I can send out the information to everybody, what their anticipated start date schedule would be. We have put a COVID dashboard on our website, so you can go and see. It's updated weekly to show the cases that we've had, whether they were community related. So far, knock on wood, we haven't had any epi related within the classroom where one person's giving it to another that we know of, or if it's an undetermined. And that follows pretty well with other school districts in the area that we've seen kind of what they're modeling and what they talk with public health. That seems to be the best way to stay transparent about it without identifying any particular student. So it's just by the whole school as instead of any individual grade levels, things like that.
And the link to the COVID dashboard is right at the top of our website.
Yes, it's very prominent. I think on the
Very
right-hand side, if you look at the top sash there, we're trying to make sure that it's prominent. We're not trying to hide any information, but we also don't want to cause any panic about anything. Right now, we're in constant communication with public health around any issue, any cases that we have coming up. We've got our administrators are doing a great job of mitigating those at each of the sites and really working themselves really hard during the day to stay on top of that and be as proactive as humanly possible to address it.
So with regard to the COVID MOUs with the CSE and WTA, have all of our staff been updated on the elements of those MOUs so that they understand what to do procedurally when they suspect a COVID issue of any kind?
I believe so, but I'm in contact every day with administrators because each one of these situations tends to come up with something a little different that we're finding. So they always have questions about how we're implementing. But I'll double check with our administrators, make sure that they've communicated well. If they have any questions, we've got an admin meeting coming up where we'll sit down.
Each site, for example, has someone who is well-trained in the process as we know it today.
Absolutely,
So that there's a go-to person at each site,
absolutely.
and ultimately, obviously,
And usually a couple of go-tos. Our secretaries have been amazing in supporting the administrators. The administrators are usually the first line, but our secretaries are like, no, remember, we've got to do this or whatnot, and keeping everything straight. So those teams are functioning really well at each of the sites and doing a good job so far.
I know on one of the days before school started, when teachers were being in-serviced and trained, I stopped by the in-service going on at the high school, and Mike was going over what was on the COVID plan extensively with his staff when I was here. And I think it was really not just giving out the COVID plan, but he was, the staff was talking about it, they were interacting about it, they were clarifying some things. So there was I'm sure the other school sites were doing the same things.
And we also created a PowerPoint that we can have folks view, say they weren't at that it at least hits the highlights of the plan. And they can go through, and then at the end, they can certify that they've had training in it as well. So
is there anything like in the form of like a flow chart been developed?
the closest thing we have is probably the chart that was kind of exploded from that very small type one that was in our
the
plan.
appendix?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so we've come up with a better plan that had, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 for the 8 different scenarios that are possible: unvaccinated, vaccinated, masked, unmasked, close contact, or COVID positive. And that has been really great that we've been able to point to that. It was translated into Spanish so that we've got that. If we have someone who's a Spanish speaking parent, we can easily communicate that to them, and it flows very well. So far that tool has been very adequate in meeting our needs with that, and we can update it pretty quickly if things change. So
We done with item C?
we are.
On to item D, discussion multiple meetings a month. Where do we stand?
So this was a request of the board. I had a few questions that I was thinking of as we were going through this is, if we're choosing to go this route, we want to make sure that we have clear goals for those meetings. Would it make sense to have multiple meetings only in some months? I know we talked about that concept as well. And we're also, as we talked before, that we're looking at moving over to the online platform. It's easier to disseminate materials and make multiple meetings have less impact on our office and operations at that point as well. So.
Well, from my perspective, it was to help provide a little bit more direction, partly for you because you're new to our organization. The other part was to spread the mass over multiple meetings a month, so that hopefully those meetings would go more streamlined and cover less material each month, but be a little bit more effective, possibly. I'm not sold on having multiple meetings a month, but I think it's worth a discussion. I don't know where the rest of the board is.
May I ask a question, Mr. Aldridge? I was looking through that calendar. I was just looking through it because I knew that was coming up, and I was reviewing what we went through. And each month you have pretty much lined out what's to be covered for that month. Do you see a problem being able to cover that material?
At this point, no. I mean, our staff is is really in the cycle of making that monthly meeting and making that sort of their deadline for things and working toward that. They're pretty effective at that, I believe, and feel very comfortable with that. I think adding a second meeting into the month is, while it may seem helpful, I don't know that it changes the workflow for my staff at all. They still have the deadlines they have, and there are certain things that have to come you know, like say our unaudited actuals, we could, if we had a second meeting this month, it's not like we could put that any later. It has to be done by September 15th. And a lot of the deadlines that exist on a lot of those plans happen at those types of intervals where it's the 15th of the month for whatever reason. And that's why our structure is the way it is with that first meeting of the month. If we had a second meeting, I would suggest that it focus more on either board development, relationship development, you know, strategy development, that type of thing would be more appropriate. So you have a business meeting and then maybe a meeting that focuses on, like I say, just the development of our governance abilities. There are 2 months I know of that we would really be required to have probably 2 meetings scheduled if we wanted to continue with the same with the schedule we currently have. December is one that hasn't traditionally, but I was talking, and there's been some changes in the election laws. It was about, I don't know if it was 2018, I think it was, that we had to, that's when they switched over to everything's on the even years, there are no more odd year elections. At the same time, they also said that a board couldn't have its organizational meeting until after the second Friday in election year, so that the results were certified. So that often won't meet our normal board meeting pattern that we've had for the organizational meetings. So that would need to stand different. And then we have in June, we have to have the 2 meetings generally because we present one for Lcap, where we're presenting the Lcap and the budget, and the second where we're adopting. So those would be required. Those are not negotiables essentially around that.
So we've been doing that for years as it is. If we were to go to a second board meeting, would we just go to the second and fourth Wednesday of the month? Would we choose a different day? Is the board interested in pursuing a second meeting of the month? I guess part of the question to answer.
Yeah.
Yes, Robert?
No, it is not. I mean, I prefer not to, only because of my personal schedule. However, I do whatever the board decided as a group. But personally, because my evenings are busy, unless we had it on a Friday. But other than that, I would rather have a longer board meeting, less days than multiple board meetings, for me personally.
Diane, your thoughts?
A longer one. If we need a second one, we can make that decision ahead of time. Like September, we could do this one. We can do something in October, but maybe we need 2, but we have Thanksgiving there, so that's the problem there. I know the last one in December is due to elections, and we only get one this time, so that would be it.
Right, that flip flops like this one.
Yeah, and we did 5 in the month of June. So that's more than 2.
Is that all?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah, the bond issues have complicated that somewhat.
yes, so I know we're flexible.
I'd rather leave it open for emergency board meetings. I know we've had some extra board meetings because of issues that came up that had to be dealt with. And I think with all the COVID issues and the testing and the possible shutdown, if too many kids get COVID, that kind of thing, is that we should leave it open for
Just work
for
with
an
special meetings.
emergency board meetings. And,
Oh,
Yeah, truthfully, I initially wanted to, I thought that we'd be a little more alert or something if it were shorter and just more frequently I could get all the stuff read and that. But the more I deal with it, the less it matters.
Sounds like we're going to stay with one meeting.
the other thing I will say with the online platform is as we're building the agenda, we can kind of give you access ahead of time to start reading, like when we're doing policy updates and things like that, say, hey, the policies are there. If you want to go ahead and start reading those, because that takes a long time, those types of pieces. So we'll try to be very cognizant of that and as we're moving forward, have those types of supports for you so that you're not hit with a 400-page packet that you need to read.
There's going to be a learning curve with respect to that. is there something we can start working towards?
Yes, we've got training is scheduled next Friday, Thursday or Friday for us? Next Friday for us in the district office. And at that, we'll set a, talk about some dates and probably before our October board meeting is maybe we can have them have a real short closed session and then have a training before the meeting starts. And maybe even model that as we're going through for the public to see the interface as well. It's a pretty slick interface and it.
Is that training that's scheduled for next Friday? Is that open to us as well?
I think it's really for the back-end users is the intent, and then we'll have a board training that we can schedule. So we could set a date as well. It just, if we can consolidate it all into one, I always find that.
I did clarify with her, and she said it was just for me on Friday and then that it would roll out.
Yeah. I've worked with the same system in my previous district and the learning curve isn't too steep on it. It kind of is, it makes sense, which is nice.
So we're actually looking for an implementation possibly by October.
If we would never just drop it on you, we would run both for 1 month.
Right.
At least so you have the traditional format and running that one as well. So if everything falls into place, then yes, it's possible for October that we can.
Okay. We are at item E, approval of provisional internship PIP for Kenneth Peterson, multiple subject certificated teacher, elementary grades.
And so Mr. Peterson is going to serve as an independent study teacher for us. We hired him as a K-12, so we have some flexibility there. It is likely that he will move on. He qualifies for a CTE credential, but that takes a little longer to verify some of the backgrounds and things like that. So he will be able to get that credential later this year, we're hoping. And if for some reason then our independent study drops down, we might be able to offer some additional electives or even extend that out to our middle school or something if there's, so we can get creative if for some reason our independent study numbers drop off and we still have a teacher on the books. He's got 25 years of experience right now in, not 25 years, many years of experience. I think it's around 25 in the construction industry. So he's very knowledgeable there. He's very eager to be a part of our community and is, I think would be a great addition for us.
Is there a motion to approve item E?
I move that we approve my item E, employing Kenneth Peterson.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All approved, say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? All. Item F, approval of provisional internship permit for Larissa Sproul Maderas, educational specialist, moderate severe certificated teacher at the Willits High School.
And so Mrs. Manjares has agreed to work in our mod severe classroom at Willits High. She will have a PIP credential, but she has had many years of experience, about 25 years in early childhood education. So she's very familiar with like the IEP process and those types of things. She's been in education for some time. She's got her bachelor's and things. So this will just be an extension into a different realm for her, but at the same time, it's not completely new. She knows educational principles, pedagogy, that type of thing. So she's got some strong background there. Not to mention, she's also Tom Manjares' wife, who's a special education teacher for us as well in the district. So yeah, she's got some built-in support there too of someone who can move forward there. But she did an awesome job in the interview, and I think the special ed staff is very happy to have her.
Is there a motion to approve item F?
I'll move to approve item F.
I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Then we'll call for the vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed?
No.
And we are item G, approval of Henry's roofing change order.
And I know the last time the board had asked about the Henris, the total of the change orders. With this one, it's about 10% of the whole project cost, which is a pretty normal variance with change orders and things like that in a project this size. So
And so last time we didn't approve this.
it was one that got left off inadvertently. And so this is just this will help us close out the whole project as we're going back and because it's bond funds, we had to verify each change order as we're going down. And we realized that we missed this one.
Because isn't it like their second or third change order?
I think it's the
About third or fourth.
fifth or maybe
Oh.
sixth. So, I mean, there's
Seven,
been,
okay, well, I missed a
there's
couple.
been a few change
I
orders
knew
there
there
for
had
sure.
been more than one.
And like I say, the total is about right around $75,000 all total of all the change orders. And it was about a $750,000 project.
I think whenever you remodel something old, you always
Yeah.
you always
anytime they
run
open it
into
up.
issues that weren't expected and.
Correct.
Yeah.
I
And
know
that's-
when we remodeled our kitchen, they tore up the old flooring and the slab was badly cracked, so they had to jackhammer up the old slab in the middle of our kitchen in order to finish the remodel, you know, they weren't expecting that, so
Yeah.
it's a ongoing issue with older homes.
One question I have with respect to the whole roofing project overall is, what kind of warranty is there?
Oh, you know, I need to ask that question to see. So,
Can you get an answer to that? Send out an email, please.
I will.
Email, please. Is there a motion to approve item G, Henry's change order?
I move that we approve the Henry change order.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none? All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
I,
We have a change order for Valley Paving.
So this was a change order that came about once we discovered the diesel fuel tank. After they finished that, then they had to go back and do some grading and things like that, increased this. It wasn't a huge increase there, but it was a direct result of that. So,
Is there a motion to approve item H?
I'll move to approve item H, approval of Valley paving change order.
And second?
I second it.
Discussion. Are we done? This closes out Valley Paving?
It does all except for the handicap accessible, that spot that's right in front of the cafeteria here that we're still waiting on DSA approval for. It was the only part that needed because it's an accessibility way
The slope and
that
so
falls
forth.
under there. Yeah,
So that work has not been completed.
that has not, because we haven't gotten approval from DSA at this point to do that. So we will have to wait on that to see when they finally get it to us.
So item H, there's been a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
I,
We are at approval of Paulson excavation invoice.
So this was the invoice for Paulson Excavation. If you look at it, it has a lot of subcontractors on it and a lot of paperwork. It was quite the invoice there. All told, it was about $92,000, I believe, was the final total sum. We'll be working on writing up the proposal over to the city of Willits to cover half of that. Now that we have all of that information together, we can move forward with their process. They were going to see what funding sources they could use, that kind of thing. But I think that they're amenable to the idea of supporting their part of the MOU with this particular situation. So.
Cool.
I know Mark said we were very lucky to have Paulson Excavating so close by to deal with this problem when it came up.
Yeah, and they jumped right on it. when that
Yeah.
happened.
They responded very quickly, and I guess they've had a lot of experience. I guess down in Ukiah, they had just about on every corner for each of the buildings, they had a diesel tank that they didn't know about. And so as they're doing that paving or that expansion project down there, they ran into on almost every corner the same issue that we had.
Wow.
And so Paulson handled all that. So they were old hat at it by the time they got to us.
So is there a motion to approve item I, Paulson excavation invoice?
I move that we approve item I, the Paulson excavation invoice.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We're at approval of proposal for geotechnical investigation. This is for the Brookside classroom project.
And this is just the next step. In speaking with Don, this and the GSA approval are the only two things that would hold up a project for a significant amount of time. So he's suggested we jump on this first so that it's done, and we'll submit it with it to DSA, and there shouldn't be any reason for DSA to send it back our way.
Is there a motion to approve?
I'll move to approve.
Robert, second?
I'll second.
I do have a question with respect to this. This geotechnical investigation, they're going to drill some wells on the site. And what I don't understand is, I get the reason for it with respect to if it was new construction. It's not new construction. We haven't had any issues with liquefaction, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, with the buildings that have been there for
1976.
a long, long time.
Right.
I would argue that there should be a variance here, so we don't have to spend this money. This is ridiculous in my opinion.
There should be, and honestly, with what SHN is doing for us is they're using some of their old work when they did the solar project. It just didn't take into account that particular area. So we're already getting a discount on services because of the work they had done previously there. Because they're able to use some of that. Unfortunately, it's part of code, and there's no way of getting around it. Don's tried all the different angles that are possible in the situation, and he's asked multiple ways to try to get us around this particular piece, and there just wasn't any way to get around it.
Okay. Gotta love paperwork.
Yep.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Or item K, approval of the LCAP update.
And so the LCAP didn't have substantial changes to it, but I did want to bring it back just for transparency's sake. We added a few actions onto the LCAP under goals 1 and 2. And those are mostly to be compliant with what Mendocino County Office of Ed was requiring of us, so that we're compliant with state requirements around those. All the actions that we added on were existing in other plans. So they don't increase our budget. They don't have any impact. They're just consolidating things into one plan.
One of the things I was reading in the LCAP that jumped out at me was one element that suggested that I believe it was at Bechtel Grove, that were suggesting that we were deficient in our one-to-one technology area.
And that was an old feedback survey that was provided. It was just, they wanted to specifically see that because CSI needs to be a part of, because Bechtel Grove is in CSI. It has to reflect back on that need survey that was done in the, I believe it was the 18-19 or maybe the fall of the 19-20 school
So
year.
that issue's been rectified.
Absolutely, yeah. We're now one-to-one throughout the district, and then some.
So, and my assumption is not only are we one-to-one, but IT has enough spares, parts, pieces, whatever, to maintain one-to-one
Yes.
pretty much.
Yeah, and they're continually monitoring that. In fact, I just talked to Jen today. They have a need for some additional units, so we are putting another invoice or another purchase order together for that. And in the LCAP every year, we have the one-to-one item, and so it's planned for replenishment every year. There's long-range planning.
No, there was like a hand-me-down kind of a process for some of this stuff too. The most newest technology goes to a certain level, and then things kind of filter down.
Well, and we were actually talking about the idea of having students get basically have classroom sets up until the 6th grade, and then they get a device in the 6th grade. and it just carries them through high school. And that's about the lifespan of most of these devices. And that way, when they leave high school, it's theirs. You know, we just surplus it at that point. They can take it with them. If it's got any life left to it, they can use it in that regard, but it probably won't have very much. So,
I mean, technology still changes extremely rapidly.
yeah.
We have a motion to approve the LCAP update.
I have one question.
Go ahead, Paul.
The, you know, the issues of being able to connectivity or whatever, and finding spots. So, okay, I read all of that about the one-on-ones and everyone can connect, but everyone cannot. So how is that working itself out?
So you mean on campus or off campus?
Well, it's off campus, but this is strictly on is what we're trying to say here?
Yes, that we will increase our connectivity on campus. So if there are specific areas that we don't have connectivity, I should probably know about that so we can plan as our E-rate comes up this year to add additional access points and those kind of things on so that we can make sure that we have coverage.
And
Jen and I-
strictly for the campus, though,
Correct. And then
Okay.
we're also looking at going with Verizon to provide some hotspots for some of our students. It's still going to run into some of the same issues. It's not going to be perfect, but we think the coverage is probably going to be better than the T-Mobile that we had last year.
right?
Just in polling people around and anecdotal evidence of where coverage is best and that kind of thing. Verizon seems to be as good as AT&T up here for the most part, and T-Mobile was definitely a tier down. So hopefully that'll increase that connection for any of our kiddos that need that support. And we're starting off with about 25 of those, and if we need to expand it.
Joe, have you heard any updates from the state on their initiatives for the rural broadband?
The last I had heard is that we are, the 101 corridor is one of the priority areas. The state has some significant funds they've set aside for rural broadband. So that we should actually get some lines that are starting to run up here at the beginning of next year. I won't
Next year,
hold my
meaning
breath.
January? Or
Yes,
next year
starting
meaning-
the
Oh,
contract starting in January. I don't know when the service will become active,
okay.
but they've got a significant portion of funds that are set aside for that.
I know a large new signal tower was installed on San Pedro during the summer. And I don't know if it's been activated yet. Last time I talked to the person who installed it or the company that installed it, they said it hadn't been activated. That was, I don't know, a few weeks ago. So anyway, but he said that it should significantly improve reception in Willits. So that's some signal if you check with
Okay,
that they installed.
thank you.
So essentially, these are efforts that will improve our, because we're no longer doing quote distance education. These are things that will help out the kids that are currently on independent study.
Correct. Or if a student needs homework, help or things like that, we want to make sure they've got access because more and more of our textbooks are on the computers. And so it's really hard for them to go home and work out of a textbook if they can't access it.
So a motion to approve the LCAP update.
I move that we approve the LCAP update.
So second,
I'll second.
motion and second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
We are at approval of MOU with the city of Willits.
And this MOU is for a school resource officer. That was a part of the approved LCAP that we had. So this is following through on that. Some things to note there. The MOU is pretty detailed around the idea that the SRO is not there to enforce school rules. That's up to the administration. That's up to the staff. And so if this person notices an infraction on the school's property, they're to just bring that person forward to the administration to deal with the situation. That's not the type of role. We don't want them to have that adversarial role. We want them to be in support and work to make the campus a safer place that way. It also, the SRO candidate would meet with me, and I'd probably bring in Maria and Mike as well, just because the SRO will serve primarily at the high school and in Bechtel, just to make sure that we feel comfortable with the particular candidate that's being brought forward by the police department before we sign off and say yes, that will place them. So and the chief here has been great. Fabian's doing a great job of recruiting, and he's got some great candidates in mind. So I'm looking forward to seeing what he brings forward.
So the Willits PD is fully staffed now that they can provide a school resource officer?
Yes,
Okay.
and Chief Lazario is very dedicated to this program and to the idea of even starting an Explorers program again. I know that had been something in the past, just to try to improve those relations with a lot of our students and everything. So.
Motion to approve item L.
I move that we approve that.
Paula, is there a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item M, approval of the GAN limit resolution 2021-22-2.
I'm going to leave it to Nikki to describe what the GAN limit is. We were talking about
Can
this the
anyone
other
really
day.
describe what the GAN limit is? First, I did want to make a quick highlight here that we did have a little discrepancy on the numbering. So the number that's on the actual resolution is the correct one, not the number that is listed on the agenda.
And we made that adjustment at the start of the meeting. So
Oh, sorry, I missed that. Okay, great.
no worries. You weren't here. It's okay.
So the GAN limit is one of the forms, the GAN form is one of the forms that we do as part of the unaudited actual. So as we go through the closing process in our SAP software, it does all of the legwork of this calculation. But essentially, this is a calculation that is required, I believe, of all public agencies, not just school districts, every year, that they must calculate the GAN limit, provide this data to the state, because then it gets incorporated into the state's overall GAN limit. And the GAN limit is intended to be a constraint on public spending. If it were to, I think, to prevent it from moving faster than inflation and other factors. However, the way that the calculation actually happens, that really is never happens. I mean, the opposite tends to be true, I think. And so it ends up being a formality, this form. It's still legally required. All agencies must submit it to the state, but it has no bearing on our actual budget.
So a motion to approve item M, GAN limit resolution 2021-22-2.
I move to approve M, the GAN limit resolution.
Second,
1 second.
Diane? Thank you. Any discussion or questions? This is annual recurring paperwork. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, Nikki, you're still up. Approval of unaudited actuals report
Alright.
for 2020-21.
And I think Michelle's gonna do a screen share for the folks that are Zooming.
You have to talk louder. I'm having trouble.
Okay. I'm gonna wait for Rochelle to get the screen share going.
Keeps crashing. So
Crashing.
it keeps bringing it up.
Okay.
So I'm gonna keep trying.
Okay. Well, if folks need copies of this later, you can reach out to me tomorrow. It was emailed out to the same email list for everyone who received the agenda. So folks should have this. On page 2, I think is where we usually go to. At the very top of page 2, you can see the net increase or decrease in fund balance. So for 2020-21, we did not deficit spend, which is great news. We do anticipate the budget for current year is a little into deficit, but very close to balance. One of the biggest changes that I would point out from what we looked at estimated actuals to where we are now was that when we closed the food service budget, we were in better shape than we had anticipated. I have really struggled to know how to anticipate some of the impacts of COVID to the food service budget in particular, because whereas many of our other sources of revenue are based on state calculations, the food service revenue is still based on participation rate food sales. So even though it's not sales in the context of students purchasing with money, it is the number of meals served. And we did everything in our power to try to connect students to food throughout the course of COVID, regardless of the distance learning situation. But despite that, having kids not on campus, I think we had less students participating. And so I was concerned about the impacts to revenue. We also had, concerns about what the impacts to food costs were going to be. So it was really tough to anticipate what that budget would look like. And ultimately, when we closed the year, our contribution to food service was about $160,000 less than what I was thinking it might be when we looked at estimated actual. So that was great news. I'm really hoping that as we move through this school year right now, we'll start to establish some good data for doing better budgeting for that fund. We've had a lot of change. So we had change to the CDP program. We had audit related changes that occurred in that program. So we haven't really had many normal years when it comes to the food service budget. Makes it very challenging for me to take historical data and project it forward in any meaningful way. So I think as we move into this year, we'll see finally that we'll settle into some normalcy as long as we remain on campus.
Do we reach out and check with other districts to find out how they're dealing with their food service budgets? For example, we did check basically 2 years ago, we went over to Kelseyville and learned a great deal about how they operate. And some of what they're doing, hopefully we would be modeling. But I'm just curious to know where other school districts might be with respect to how they're dealing with it.
So Christy, I think, has stayed in touch with some other districts in terms, I think the biggest challenge right now that they've been facing is how to put together menus that are accessible to students in a way that is COVID safe, but also not creating like mess issues because of where they're expected to eat on various locations on campus. There's a lot of challenges. So I know she's been kind of looking for ideas from other districts for menu planning and things like that. We have had discussions about some other brainstorms as we kind of get into maybe more normalcy, when they can start making more things like chilies and hot dishes and things like that. We are anticipating some additional equipment funding. So we've discussed some equipment that we can purchase that would assist with her capacity for doing that kind of cooking. So we have tried to look to other districts. And then I think also it's going to be helpful, Joe comes from another district where they've done various things that, he has ideas.
About purchasing contracts.
For the contract, I believe she is part of the Lake County food bid. So right now, Cisco is who we are doing our food purchasing.
But we're actually purchasing under contract now.
We were already, and now, so we were on our own contract, and I believe for this school year, she's shifting on to piggybacking with the Lake County contract.
Thank you.
The other thing I wanted to point out that is a change is that now that we have the bond fund, there is an additional form here that you guys may not have seen in the past. So form 21 is the bond fund. So that is a change. I don't think there's a lot of other big changes. I think we have looked at a lot of the COVID related stuff at budget adoption and at estimated actuals. We're definitely seeing the impacts of that on the restricted side of the budget. There have been many changes from the state as we've moved forward incorporating the various COVID funds, because they are allocating them into many locations in the budget as opposed to a single pot. They all have various rules and regulations related to them. And there have been some discrepancies from the state as to how they want us to do some of the accounting. So I think we've all talked in the past about the concept of how we do our accounting for things like Title I, where we only recognize revenue that has actually been spent, as opposed to showing all the revenue coming in, showing what the expenditures and any remaining balance being booked as a fund balance. We're not allowed to do that with some of our federal funds. We must only book the revenue when the expenditure takes place. And so we've been getting kind of conflicting information back and forth from the state related to some of the COVID funds, if they are supposed to be unearned revenue accounting rules or fund balance accounting rules. So there are some variations in how it looks compared to estimated actual related to that. So we're as up to date as we can be in terms of the state's requirements for those.
About the cafeteria fund, so what happened this year or this past year is that we were only about $400,000 in the hole, so to speak, as opposed to the 6 or 8 that we were not last year, but the year before that.
Yeah, so where we closed out is on page 1 near the bottom in section D, other financing sources. There's transfers out,
Right.
351,000. That's where we landed for 2021. That was the contribution from general fund to food service.
Oh, okay, so that's what I understand. We did better.
Yes.
Oh, okay, by about twice. I mean, last year it was,
Yeah, because the year that we had those issues around the audit, that was the one that really hit us the hardest.
yeah.
So compared to that, yes, significantly better, but also better compared to what we had been budgeting for this year.
Okay, so what you're figuring is that since next year it's the projected budget, right, for 21, 22?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, so it's gonna be about $175,000 higher. Plus, what else do you figure has benefited, or what do you think was done so differently that, I mean, this is a
For
good
food
thing in my
service?
mind. I just,
For
So-
food service, you mean?
yeah, I mean, apparently they didn't need to order as much food.
So some of it, so a lot of it really had to do with me being conservative in my revenue estimate. I really did not have a good basis for how to project how much revenue we would receive. And
Mhm.
even at the time that we are doing the budget in June, I really, at that point in time, because of the cycle for when you do your food claims, I think I only had claim data through like February, maybe March. So there were still several months of data that I did not have. And what we did see for food service was their participation rates were more robust throughout the year. And then certainly more so when we came back onto campus. And so, but I didn't want to presume that that would be the case at the time that I was working at estimated actuals. So
Okay.
yeah, I would think that's a big portion of it. Yeah.
Well, during last year, it sort of went from babies to 18-year-olds also, that we were offering food.
We are still
And I
on
wondered
those
if that's what you felt could have boosted things and made the, I
Yeah,
mean, in my
it was-
mind it did, but
it
I
helped.
don't know if that's
It
true.
absolutely helped.
Okay.
And the great thing about that, I mean, it's a win-win situation. It is great for families. It's good for school districts. We are still allowed to operate on that program throughout
Okay,
this
that's
year.
good.
So just so people know, even though we're not in distance mode right now, we are still authorized to be providing meals to all children up to age of 18. So even if you have kids that are not enrolled, they are allowed to participate throughout this year. And I know Christy is really still trying to work with people on particular arrangements. You know, if people have particular scheduling issues or questions about picking food up or anything, you know, she's really, really tried to accommodate everyone's particular situation.
So do we provide for students at the charter schools, or are they on their own?
I don't believe so. They are allowed to if they contact us, but when they are in session, I think they do their own thing for food service.
Food service has done a really good job, even over the summer. I know I had morning swimmers, and so we worked with them that they would have lunch or breakfast, lunches for them. And they really worked hard to make things happen. So bless their heart for all that hard work that they did.
Yeah, it's really, it's honestly kind of turned into an around the year activity because of this seamless summer. And because we're in seamless summer, it also allowed us to do a couple extra things last year, like providing meals during Christmas break, during spring break. So some of the other school closures, we were able to send food home still for kids, which was really great.
So they're still accommodating people who will, I mean, I know that they worked out a really good schedule for some people to get a week's worth at a time. And all the sandwiches and whatever's were not made up, so it didn't get dry or whatever. And I just wondered, do they, even though school is in session, they're gonna be able to do that?
As far as I understand, because we have a significant number of students doing independent study, I would
Yeah.
imagine that's going to be really important for them to have access to that.
Okay.
And if we're already doing it, then there's no reason that, you know, other
should
families like with, you know, toddlers and such
Yeah.
can also participate.
Okay.
yeah.
Thanks, I wondered if that's what helped that chunk of money so much. And they call books and supplies food, right? I mean, isn't that,
It does fall into that
That's what I
category,
thought.
correct?
I just
Yeah.
didn't want to misunderstand it.
Yeah, so when you, where you would see theirs in particular is the Fund 13, Form 13.
Yeah, that's what I was
That would
reading.
be there, yeah.
Oh, okay.
They have some other supplies in that category as well, but primarily when you're looking at that, most of it is
It's
the food
food,
cost, yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good.
So Nikki,
Yeah.
even though it's free and reduced lunch, we used to fill out that form. We still need our parents to fill those forms
Yes,
out.
that's a great question. Thank you. We do not use the form that's called free and reduced lunch anymore because we do provide meals free of charge to families. We are still required to collect income data for families, and that ties actually more into our LCFS funding. It drives the supplemental concentration grant funding along with our EL, foster, and homeless rates. So those things all combined are the unduplicated count, and the unduplicated count is what determines what the supplemental concentration grant funding will be. I don't have an amount right in front of me, but I mean, it's over $2 million for our district annually. So it's super important that folks fill those forms out. It is all that gets used for. We have, you know, we report that as part of the aggregated data to the state, and the percentage of students who qualify, what it used to be free and reduced, now just becomes a benchmark for this other fund.
Kim, is that form available online?
I believe so. I will follow up with Jen on that. We have also incorporated a new process where folks can actually fill it out through, is it just through the online data confirmation or?
Right, so when the parents do the yearly data confirmation in their parent portal, it's one of the steps that they have to complete before they can move on. We did go online before.
Good.
Yep, so we're trying everything we can to make it accessible, really get it out to people, because we didn't have return rates on that form last year, and so we're really hoping, trying every avenue we can to get the return rates up this year.
We actually give that project or that follow-up to somebody to stay on top of it.
Yes, and Jen and I have had a lot of conversations around that, so it's very much on our radar.
Yeah, it's Jen to pull that data.
Yeah, and so with the new program we put in place, it's called Rocket Scan. It has some built-in reporting functions that allow us to easily determine who has responded or not responded, so that our site staff can do some follow-up with the family.
I'm sorry, Diane.
Okay, the ETB cards or the,
Oh, yes, yeah.
and this is way the parents can get that during the summer as well.
So the PEBT cards have been the cause of much confusion.
Yeah.
We actually were told by the state at one point that they would be sending, different points throughout the last year where they would send them out. And on one of them, I think it was called the PEBT extension, we were starting getting reports that people were not receiving them. So we actually had about 4 different staff people working diligently on that for a few months, involved even our our legislators, reaching out to their offices, trying to get that flowing. And finally, we're able to get them what they needed so they could get the cards sent out. It's kind of a tricky thing for us because they take the data that gets recorded through CalPAD, so addresses and such, and eligibility information, and they send them out to families. But so they're using our data, but it's not our program, and we don't have direct control or contact with the folks at the state who are doing the program. And so it's confusing to families because I think there's some understanding on their side that maybe they think it's a school program, and it's really not. But it's super important for families to keep their addresses with us up to date, because ultimately that's what gets sent into the state, and that's how they send the cards out. So we did a big push. I think it was March. We did a big push out on all the sites, went through and reached out to families to make sure everybody's addresses were correct and current. I haven't gotten any updates in a couple weeks. Have you?
I haven't gotten updates, but I did ask some of the parents I know in the district, and all of them received, I did 2 or more. A couple of them had received 3, a couple hadn't when I did check in with them. So I haven't heard that parents are not. I think it was a little later than anticipated. I did hear that our parents were receiving.
The issue that I ran into with some families is if they have like 3 kids, they would get 2 cards, but they didn't get the 3rd, or strange things were happening. And I'm truly sorry. I told everyone it was a school program to give you all a call,
And that's okay, because
Who should
honestly,
they have
who
called?
else could they have called? We even had a hard time tracking that down. So I can't imagine if all the families were trying to do that. I think it was perfectly fine for that to flow through us, because we were able to kind of push our way through some of the red tape and finally clear it up, So I do say, like, if people know that they're having issues or they need some help, feel free to let us know. There may not be anything directly we can do, but it was good that people let us know, because once we heard from a couple, we're like, okay, this is a widespread issue. We have to really pursue this. And I'm glad that, people kept us in the loop about that.
So then just what you need is names, or you'd rather have them call and talk to you?
And the correct address.
Yeah, you can have them contact the district office,
Okay.
because we ran into a couple different types of scenarios.
Mhm.
And so if people have things going on, if they get in touch with us, it helps us, we can kind of ask the details of what they're dealing with.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because most of what I found was either real late, or one kid gets it, one kid doesn't.
Yeah.
And, there's like 2 years between them, they're both in school. They're gonna figure
Right.
out
Yeah,
what's
we
wrong.
found the issues kind of inexplicable. I don't know what was happening at the state other than general overwhelm. And we may end up having to refer people elsewhere, but certainly we're a good starting point. We really want to help connect them to these resources if we can.
Okay, thanks.
Any further, Nikki?
I don't think so. Do you guys have any more questions?
Our motion to approve the unaudited actuals.
I make a motion to approve the unaudited actual.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of item N, approve unaudited actuals for 2021, 2020, 2021. Say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And we are at item O, approval of Education Protection Act expenditure report for 2020/21.
Rochelle, are you able to share this one, or?
Yeah, it goes up to a minute.
Okay, I just wasn't sure if maybe the smaller file size would help. So So the EPA also is a very routine item that we're required to report on each year. In 2012, I believe it was, Prop 30 took place where schools had received some funding cuts, and the funding was restored to schools via these changes to sales tax, and I think some augmentations to some of the personal income tax as well. And when those funds were restored to schools, they were done so with some strings attached. And essentially that was they could not be used for administrative type expenses. And so we are annually required to report on the use of these funds. And in our district, like I think most districts do, we just use these funds for teacher salaries. To be clear, when you're looking at where these funds fall into the overall budget, they are part of our LCFF funding. So it's just one aspect of the LCFF calculation that takes place. And they are considered unrestricted, so we use them for teacher salaries.
So item O, is there a motion to approve?
I'll move that we approve item O, the Education Protection Act expenditure report for 2020, 2021.
Is there a second?
Second it.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we're at board policy revision, second reads, final approvals. We have a host of these. We've had a lot of time to review them. Any discussion?
Yeah, I still have questions about the administering of medication and monitoring health. My understanding when I read that, I mean, well, maybe what I need to ask you. Last time I understood the thought was to go with B, the recommendation.
Correct.
Okay, and B says, no, we don't administer any medication, and if somebody needs it, they come get their kid and give it to them off the campus though, right?
Correct.
Oh, okay, and then the kid comes back to school and that's
Correct.
that. Okay, and I think my biggest deal was that this applies to all medication.
No.
Okay, only the
applies only to
opiates and
cannabis.
marijuana, right?
Right.
Okay,
And it's was specifically around a medication that's used for as an anti-seizure medication that contains some THC, and that's the rationale behind this being a policy. We currently don't have any students who need that service at school. When I spoke with legal, they said if you have a student who needs that, then we can reconsider that policy at that time and make a change. But otherwise, it sends a very clear picture, because if we open it up, then there could be other abuses of that we don't wish to have, and sends the wrong signal on our campuses. So,
Any other questions on any of those elements surrounding item P?
So we're considering going with option 2 because of the conflict between state and federal law regarding the legality of medicinal cannabis. The board prohibits the administration of medicinal cannabis to students on school grounds by parents, guardians, or school personnel.
So, and that's correct, Jeannie, at least at this stage of the game. I would suggest if we're going to look at item, use option B with respect to administration of medication and monitoring health, that policy, that board policy and administrative regulation, make a motion to approve these policies with choosing option B with respect to that one particular policy.
I don't see B. I see option 2, but I don't see option B.
Option 1 or 2, there's option, I thought it was option A and B.
The final read is going to be a clean version of option. Was option 2.
Is it listed as option 2?
Yeah, not anymore. It's just the policy that we chose to go with option 2.
I got you. So in terms of what you have in here is option 2. Okay. So if we approve all of these policies as written, you will be accepting option 2, which means we will not allow the administration of cannabis products on campus. Okay. Is there a motion to approve?
Not just that, one, right? We're
This
doing
was,
all of them at once.
we're going to do them all at once.
Oh, okay, then I have another couple of questions.
Fire
One
away,
of them
Paula.
is about the migrant ed law or the migrant ed program, and it states that, you know, if a kid changes their residence, they still get to remain in their school of origin.
Right.
Okay, so if I'm not misunderstanding, okay, I agree with that. I mean, I know it's a law, so it doesn't really matter if I do or don't, but what I need to understand is, then does their location school district or their, say they live here, but they want to maintain Ukiah, okay? So then does Willits need to transport them back and forth? Or does that become somebody else's? job?
It's similar to what it would be under the homeless, where we would work with Ukiah to figure out, maybe we have a bus that meets them at our boundary, you know,
Oh, okay. and
drops
that's
them off
kinda-
from us and picks them up for Ukiah, or there's different arrangements that have been out there in the past.
Oh, okay, but they're this kind of the standard things that
Absolutely,
everybody
yes.
already knows. and
Yeah,
understands.
it's the same things we would do for a student who's homeless or a foster
Foster
youth.
care.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
It-
I
it's
wasn't-
basically the same exact, they took the law and just copied it over to this.
Oh,
this group as
okay,
well.
okay. Well, then that's, okay. And the only thing I didn't understand about student board members was if no student wants to be a board member, then, and they can't find an alternate either, you just kind of do like we did last year and the position is open all the time, right? And if a student who gets nominated for a student board member decides to quit coming and they have an alternate, that person just slips right in, everything is good, right? I thought it was just real straight, but
Yes.
sometimes it doesn't.
So I had a question on the course study. And for grades 7 to 12, it talks about under social sciences. And then it gets some specificity, but it doesn't mention at all that we study the Constitution and Bill of Rights. It's just like it's not there. And I mean, that's our core.
And that falls in a subsection of, right in the same area. I can't remember the policy number right off the top of my head, but there is one that specifically addresses the Constitution and civics, that kind of thing. Actually, I sent it to you as a part of a question that came up this past month as well. It has that particular language in there.
Okay,
So,
great, thank you.
Any further discussion on policy revisions? Is there to approve?
I moved that we agree to the board policy revision.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion on item P, board policy revisions, second reads, these are final approvals. Hearing none, we'll call for the vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None. We are at items for the next board agenda, and I would suggest we just email that or give Joe a call. And we are at adjournment. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So I requested with Joe that on the next board agenda that we have some discussion of digital curriculum and the process in which digital curriculum is used in the district and what's in it.
We're just looking for a report.
Yeah,
Okay, sure. I know that Joe's been working to get us access to the digital curriculum. I've seen that. I think there's still more coming.
right.
yes.
I noticed looking at the warrants, how much money is spent on digital stuff, you know, and it's like, it can get away from you. You don't really know what's being taught or what's being utilized anymore. Or what's in it.
Let's see, is there any further? A motion to adjourn?
I'll move to adjourn.
Which made the motion, is there a second?
I'll second.
Any seconded? Motion is seconded, all in favor, say aye.
Hi.
Aye. To the Zoom crowd, thank you for attending. We are adjourned.